There is lots going on in Alberta politics, and that seems to be a constant thing. Joining us from Lethbridge today to chat about this is Cheryl Seaborn. Cheryl is a registered nurse and has been involved in politics for a long time as a former UCP constituency president, and she was also the UCP candidate for the Lethbridge West riding in the last provincial election. Cheryl, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you on here. Now, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has rattled her saber by invoking the Alberta Sovereignty Act to defy the federal Liberals' clean energy regulations intended to force all provinces to have a net zero electricity grid by 2035. What are your thoughts on this? Is this just a symbolic symbol, or do you think Smith will in fact refuse to cooperate with the feds no matter what?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, but I think the way to really look at that is the feds, are they going to cooperate with Premier Smith and other provinces who object to it? She certainly has been very good at reaching out and saying, you know, she's happy to meet with the Prime Minister, she's happy to meet with Minister Guilbeault and the Environment Minister. They haven't been as willing to meet with her. So I think that that's the direction that the question really needs to be, is are they willing to actually meet with the premiers that are having a difficulty with this? And it would appear the answer is no. They continue to push forward with their agenda. And so do I think that she's rattling a cage here? I think push come to shove, she will use that Sovereignty Act to benefit Albertans. I mean, I can't totally speak for her, but it would not surprise me to see her do that. I think that the federal government needs to take note that they have been found twice now with federal courts recently that they maybe are overstepping their jurisdiction into provincial territory, and they need to take a step back. And so they are not really regarding those things very seriously. And so this is really an issue with the federal government. And I think Premier Smith is going to do what she needs to do to protect Albertans and to protect Alberta, the interests of Albertans.
And there are some concerns that not playing nicely with the federal government will create some uncertainty for businesses considering investing in Alberta. On the other hand, Premier Smith is even going so far as to say she would consider creating a provincial crown corporation, allowing the government to build its own electric plants. Is that a good or a bad idea?
Well, let's address the first thing, which is about investments. And interestingly enough, and I know that our opponents also within Alberta have suggested that might be the case, that we would lose investment, but we haven't. Actually, investment in Alberta goes up year over year. And one of the latest investments, of course, comes from Dow, who's investing quite a lot of money in the Path to Zero program that was announced last week. And that's actually a huge investment. And it actually shows Premier Smith is willing and wants to be able to use technology to be able to get to zero emissions. That isn't something that Alberta is against. We're not against climate, working towards climate adjustments to make sure that we're not putting more carbon out there than we should be, but we want to do it in a reasonable way. We have to look at what's best for Alberta and be reasonable about it. And so I think that that's a good example that actually investment hasn't left Alberta. Investment continues to come. We have low business tax here. We have low cost of living here. And so there's really good things that way. Now, a crown corporation is an interesting prospect, isn't it? So we see that that's working actually to the benefit of our neighbors in Saskatchewan, because they're actually going to not be collecting, according to Premier Moe, what he said, he won't be collecting carbon tax. And he has the ability to not have to do that starting January 1 on electricity, because they do have a crown corporation in Saskatchewan. We are not set up that way in Alberta. I think that Premier Smith is looking at doing that in an effort, again, to protect Albertan interests and Alberta from the ongoing overreach that the federal government continues to pursue, not just in Alberta, but across all of Canada in all of the jurisdictions that it's reaching. And so she is actively and proactively thinking about legal ways that she's going to be able to prevent the federal government, from continuing to overreach. And so do I think it's a bad idea? I think it needs to be looked at. I think the costs need to be examined. but overall, we do need to protect what is Alberta's.
Now, with the recent Supreme Court ruling that Ottawa's Impact Assessment Act is in fact unconstitutional, is there a possibility, or there is a possibility, that this itself could prevent the government from imposing net zero emissions on the electricity grid by 2035? So, Cheryl, what are you hearing from Alberta businesses on the court ruling?
Well, certainly we've heard, like we all are aware, it's been reported widely in media that businesses are very excited about that outcome. The cost of doing business has gone up dramatically. The cost of doing business just generally always does go up, but with the addition of what the federal government is doing, the costs have become quite exorbitant. And for small to medium-sized businesses, it's very concerning for them. They are very concerned, and so this type of court decision helps to support the idea that we should be protected in provinces. We have to stop having that overreach happen. And I think when we look at net zero, we really need to define what net zero is. Net zero for the federal government is saying we don't want any more oil and gas. We don't want any more carbon at all. Net zero for the Alberta government is a much more realistic picture. It's saying we understand we are going to continue to need oil and gas, and not just Albertans, but all of Canada and across the world. We understand that. So let's use technology to be able to capture that carbon and make it zero, so that whatever we use, we also are capturing in a way so that we can have net zero. So that's very two different visions that we're getting. One from the Alberta government, which is a much more reasonable, measured outlook, and one from the federal government, which is basically saying we just don't want to use oil and gas anymore, which is a very unrealistic and unattainable goal at this time until technology catches up to that idea.
And by invoking the Sovereignty Act and promoting an Alberta pension plan, how do you think this affects our province's leadership role in Canada? And how do the other provinces regard us?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what province we're talking about, for sure.
Let's name a few then.
Yeah. Well, I think out east, I think probably our neighbors on the East Coast. And I actually can speak to this a little bit. I'm from there. I have family there, and they're a little bit unaware, I think, of what goes on in the West. I think that they are very unsure of what to expect from a place like Alberta, who's standing up against the government, and a government that generally they do support. I mean, they are generally Liberal supporters in the East Coast, and so it raises their eyebrows a little bit when they see the things that we're doing out in the West, for sure. I think that, however, having said that, I think I've seen more people from Ontario move to Alberta in the last several months, and actually in the last probably 1 to 2 years, than I've ever seen. And when you ask them why are they choosing Alberta, it's because of affordability and because of freedom, and they can find a job here. And so, when you look at from that perspective, there are people who are seeing Alberta as a leader. They want to live here, and they don't want to be under the thumb of a federal government.
And what do you think of the proposal for an Alberta pension plan? Can you just weigh out what the pros are and what the cons are? And do you think the Premier can actually convince a majority of Albertans to switch over?
Okay, so yes, there are actually many pros. So Alberta has a young the people that work in Alberta are younger, so they're going to be putting in a lot more money into the Alberta pension plan if it goes in that direction. Certainly, we contribute a great deal to the CPP, and in fact support the CPP far above what other provinces support it. So we have a lot of pros in that direction. We have a lot of diversity in our investments, diversity in the way that we are doing, that our economy is going, which allows us to be able to support an APP. There are areas of con that can exist if the government doesn't handle it in a way that they need to. And one of the first things, in fact, the biggest thing, is we need to have guardrails. We need to ensure that the government today and the governments of tomorrow and in the future are not able to do anything with that APP. It has to be protected from government reach, similar to the CPP. So we have to make sure that the legislation is in place to be able to do that. There are some complexities that are involved. Quebec has had their own pension plan for quite a long time, and we would probably want to reach out to Quebec's example and be able to follow the things that they do in order to keep their pension plan safe and reach out to them and maybe coordinate a little bit with them as well. There's a lot of coordination that's going to have to happen with the federal government. The federal government has indicated that the numbers are incorrect from the report, and I might say that the people that did the report, it was very independent. It was from the business of a former Liberal finance minister. So this is in no way, that we went to, or that the government went to a conservative business and said, can you do this independent study? No, they didn't. And so the federal government right now is saying, well, those numbers aren't correct, but they're also not offering us any numbers, even though we've asked. Even though the government has asked, they're not offering any of those numbers either to come back and say, well, these are the actual numbers, which begs the question a little bit why they wouldn't be doing that. I don't think that the Premier should be convincing anyone to switch over. I think that actually Albertans need to become informed. The report is available. I really encourage people to not be motivated by fear or to pay attention to necessarily what legacy media is saying about it, or really any media is saying about it. Really what people need to do is they need to get on the website, actually look at the report and do their own research on it and come to a decision on their own. No one should be convincing anyone one way or the other. Albertans need to kind of step up and find this information and come to a decision based on the information they receive and how they feel that will impact them.
Now, you touched a little bit on younger people paying into the pension plan. How would those close to retirement or in retirement benefit from an Alberta pension plan? Can you touch on that?
Well, yeah, as you look at the report, it actually says that we would make more money, even those who have already retired would actually be able to access more money just because of the amount of money that we've already put into the CPP, and that we would be able to get back from the CPP to put initially into the Alberta pension plan. So in essence, it really does benefit those who've already retired and those who are close to retirement. So, and we would be paying less into the APP than we do the CPP. And so there really are a great many pros to this. And having said that, there's legislation that will have to be done, and it's going to take about 3 years to make this happen. Once you give the federal government notice, there's lots of legislation pieces that need to be put in place in order to not only protect the APP, but to be mindful of people who receive disability benefits through CPP that live in Alberta, and many of those other functions that need to be taken into consideration and dealt with from a legislative point of view.
Now, the recent UCP annual general meeting always sees some controversial resolutions being brought forth. One of those approved by party members was one that calls for teachers, schools, and school boards to get written consent from parents before any chosen names and pronouns of students. Do you think Alberta should follow the path that Saskatchewan and New Brunswick have taken by putting those parental rights into law?
So, yes and no. I think that the grassroots of Alberta, and I've heard from many Albertans who are concerned about some of these things that are being hidden or done with their children in a school setting. But I think actually the real question is not about whether we put something in law as Saskatchewan or New Brunswick did, because honestly, another government can come and undo that law, right? And change that law. What really needs to be understood and accepted is that parents have the first right to teach their children and to raise their children the way that they believe they need to be raised, whatever that means to them culturally, by race, by religion, whatever that means to them. And what we need to do is have the government have protections of parents that the government cannot overreach into parents' lives and those decisions. And so we have to be it's a very fine line that we walk when it comes to things like that. I think parents need to be protected from government. And how do we do that so that no government can overreach into what is a parent's responsibility to do? And so we need to flip that idea around, that governments are going to protect my right as a parent or your right or other people's rights as a parent and say, no, we already have rights as parents. How are we going to protect our rights from the government? And I think that that's really how we need to look at that.
Well, you've really segued into my next and final question, because Albertans have always seen themselves as freedom protectors, not to be subjected to the federal government. So just give us some more thoughts on how parents and educators can guide children to grow up into mature adults who are freedom-minded, to be freedom-minded.
Yeah, so, I think we need to teach our children to look at the countries that aren't free, right? Let's look at the countries like China, North Korea, Russia, some in Africa, some in the Middle East, where they really don't experience freedom. Venezuela is a more recent place where those people have unfortunately gone down a path that I don't think any of them really want to be, and show them what that actually looks like, what not being able to say what you want to say looks like, read what you want to read, where news is only being controlled by the government, where fear is used, and this is the most atrocious thing to me, and it's creeping into our society, where fear is being used to motivate people in a specific direction to do things. And when you consider those things, we need to teach our children what that looks like and what the end result of that is, because I think those things are all familiar to Canadians right now, that we're being told we can't disagree with certain groups, that we're being told our voices are not allowed to be heard by our government, that we're told, there are some books that can be read, but others that can't be, where we have government-funded media organizations, and where fear is consistently being used as a method to get people to do a certain thing. And if we can teach our children what the end result of that is and where we are right now in Canada, maybe we can all be a little bit more aware of what that will look like at the end. And I don't think it's the ending that some people think it will be. And so I have great concern about our freedoms as they stand right now. And I have great concerns about children not understanding what that actually means to them. And we need to point in the direction of what other countries are going through, the poverty that they experience, the fear that they experience, the inability to ever have a conversation with someone that might be a dissenting opinion about something. That is actually a terrifying thing. And we need our children to understand that we don't have that right now here, but that it's coming. And this is what it looks like.
Cheryl Seaborn is a former UCP candidate and constituency president. Cheryl, thanks so much for being with us today.
It was very much my pleasure. Thank you.
It was great having you. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.